Okay, welcome back everybody for our last presentation for Mr. Garside for the ethics presentation. I misspoke earlier, said it was civility, but this is our ethics presentation.
You know better than civility.
I know, Steve's mumbling over here, he's not a civil man. Anyway, he doesn't need any introduction, so we'll turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Robert. And I also need to thank them for getting me here today. I was wrapping things up last night, you know, make sure the house was locked, brushing my teeth, went downstairs to make sure that the back door was locked. And you hate it when you hear a noise you're not supposed to hear in your house, right? Water. And so I'm thinking, we're doing some remodeling, maybe there's a problem in the bathroom downstairs. So I walk into the game room, squish. Well, I know the sprinklers are on, and I look, and I got water coming in through one of the windows. And so I run upstairs, toothbrush in my mouth, yelling that the basement is flooded. Ran out to the garage, turned off the sprinkler system, turned off the main, and then grabbed the bucket and started bailing the water out. And had it been light, fortunately it was dark, I'm confident that my neighbors would have thought that I had rabies. Frothing at the mouth. Anyway, so thanks for getting me here so I'm not home shop vacuuming and pulling out carpet and anyway, we've got a crew doing that, but it's good to be here. Before I start, just one kind of a current event. I know that as prosecutors, one of the challenges we've had, especially with all the grandma requests, and especially with 911 calls, we've got that additional obligation where we're not to give a statement that could prejudice someone's pretrial or fair trial rights, right? And we know that there's always been that debate where the media and under grandma have made those requests. And we had such a request. Our police department received a 911 call on a homicide matter, and the media requested that. Well, it was our position that, not necessarily under grandma, but under our obligation as prosecutors, that would be a statement that may jeopardize someone's fair trial rights. And so we declined that, and they went through the appeal process. And the hearing actually was this morning while we were here in the conference before the State Records Committee. Katie Ellis from our office and Robert Tripp from the Davis County Attorney's Office joined in arguing that before the Records Commission and explaining those rights, those fair trial rights. The media's position really on it was that, hey, other people have released their 911 calls and it's been just as bad as this one was, as far as someone allegedly confessing to committing a homicide. Well, good news, the Records Committee said not all 911 calls are created equal. And so there now is that decision that if you feel it's appropriate in upholding our obligation as prosecutors and not releasing that information, that indeed the Records Committee will listen, and they upheld that. So hats off to Katie and Robert, well done. So, helping our officers be the best. When Robert and I were talking about this topic and the different aspects of it, talking about what approach we're going to take on this, and his approach was a little bit more aspirational. Mine was a little bit more stuffy and descriptive as far as the topic goes, and we decided to settle on aspirational. Why aspirational? Well, the main reason is because as prosecutors, we are aspirational, correct? Isn't that what it is that we do? We aspire for things that are better. In fact, we work in a constitutionally created system that aspires for freedom, aspires for liberty in an ordered manner. We know that if there is no order, there is no liberty. We aspire to have safe communities. We aspire to make sure people accept their personal responsibility. And we aspire to make sure the victims' voices are heard. And always not necessarily in that order. And how do the police play into this? Obviously, they're that initial contact. They are the front line of this. Now, those of you that work on the civil side of the house, as Mark Nash is always famous to say, whenever they did an ethics presentation, one of the main topics was, who is your client? And of course, they'd always talk about, well, is it the mayor? Is it the city manager? Is it the council? Is it the county commission? Who is your client? And depending on the situation, sometimes each one of those could be. However, what the courts have ruled and how they eventually rule is no. Your client is what is the best for your entity, the community, the citizenry. And so then I ask, as a prosecutor, who is our client? We know it's not victims or witnesses, correct? Is it the police officer that calls us in the middle of the night for a legal opinion? Is it the department when we're providing department training? Well, we know that it's not any of those. So who is our client? Well, I have a picture of her. In fact, I have several pictures of her. This is who our client is. Justitia. We know that it's symbolic. We know who she is. We know what she stands for. I want to go over the symbolism just a little bit, just kind of as a reminder. A lot of symbolism. Obviously the scales. We know that those are the scales of justice, that they're to weigh the evidence. But have you ever thought about that the scales that she's holding there's no base to that? As opposed to the ones that sit on a table? Because the evidence that justice weighs is to stand on its own. The sword. The sword it represents final and certain justice. It's two-edged, so that it goes either way. It's an emblem also of authority. We don't always see it that way, but you think about it. In the United Kingdom, when someone is knighted, they use a sword. It's also a demonstration of authority, that it has the authority to receive the evidence and weigh it on the scales, and then it also has the authority to enforce that. Most of the depictions of Lady Justice have the sword held down below the scales of justice, indicating that the enforcement of justice will wait until the evidence is done. In most depictions of Lady Justice, she has a blindfold, indicating that she is approaching the case without prejudice, without passion. It matters not who comes before her, whether it's the weak, the strong, the rich, the poor. It really doesn't matter. Just as our Constitution is colorblind, so is Lady Justice. Now, not all of them have a blindfold. And some people say that way she can weigh the evidence with open eyes. The more accepted reason is that her maidenly form already is a disposition and a depiction of impartiality. The toga. The toga represents, again, it's from the Roman era, the clothing of civility, civilization, and philosophy. You'll remember that a lot of the Roman depictions and statues, they're generally a lot of times in their armament. And this is a depiction that civility should take precedence over arms. Sometimes she'll have a book with her, obviously that's the book of law. And sometimes, in some of the rare ones you've seen, there's actually a snake at her feet. And that is that she is trouncing on evil, or at least keeping evil in its place. This is our client. Isn't that cool? And who is it that's confirmed that we are ministers of justice? We are the servants of the law, and that justice is to be done? Well, we know. We talk about this case quite a bit. BERGER versus the United States from 1935. Interesting era. I read an article about this, a law review article on this. And it was Justice Sutherland who authored this, the only Supreme Court justice that we've had from the state of Utah. And it really wasn't that big of a landmark case. In fact, it didn't gain notoriety until sometime later. But it was at a time when prosecutors were more than pushing the edge. And so in this, we've come to learn what our role is. So who is the prosecutor? He or she is the representative not of an ordinary party to a controversy, but of a sovereignty whose obligation to govern impartially is as compelling as its obligation to govern at all. and whose interest, therefore, in a criminal prosecution is not that it shall obtain a conviction, but that justice shall be done. As such, he or she is in a peculiar and very definite sense the servant of the law, the twofold aim of which is that guilt shall not escape or innocence suffer. He or she may prosecute with earnestness and vigor indeed, and he should do so. He or she should do so. But while the prosecutor may strike hard blows, the prosecutor is not at liberty to strike foul ones. It is as much his duty or her duty to refrain from improper methods calculated to produce a wrongful conviction as it is to use every legitimate means to bring about a just one. And what does this have to do with our helping officers be their best? A reminder of our role that it should be, our role should be our guidepost, our anchor, and our touchstone in making sure that all members of our prosecution team keep these objectives in mind. Now, I have a little bit different perspective on this, kind of a unique perspective. There's this book called The 25th Street Confidential. All right, and it talks about the drama, the decadence, and the dissipation of Ogden's rowdiest road. All right, it talks about the history of 25th Street in Ogden, back in the days when Ogden City was the hub of the West because of the railroad. Because of that constant in and out traffic, it was quite the area for prostitution. There was illegal alcohol going on all the time. And this book came out and kind of did the history of that and was wondering how come in this conservative state there was so much debauchery up north. And the book focused a little bit on what was going on as well as what law enforcement was doing about this. Now, why does this have any interest to me? Well, my grandfather was an Ogden City police officer back in these days. And when this book came out, we were a little bit concerned as how they would view law enforcement. And they were critical of law enforcement. Fortunately for me, my grandfather's name is in the book several times, and there's only one somewhat of an allegation saying that they never found that he did anything wrong, but on occasion there was some rich guy that often let him use his car. So whether there were any benefits on the side from that, I don't know. My father doesn't remember that car, but anyway, it's in there. But it's interesting because I've had some opportunities to go through my grandfather's journal, and one that kind of took me aside is I opened one and it showed him in the middle of a marijuana bust in the 50s. I didn't think marijuana was invented until the 60s by the hippies. So anyway, so as you look at your life, as you look at your profession, as you look at the things that you're involved in, several decades from now, your grandchildren pick up a book and have an uneasy feeling in their stomach as they read that book as to what your role was in whatever case you might have been involved in. So what do we ask of our police officers? What is it that we ask of our police? Well, obviously we ask them to do traffic stops. We ask them to be crossing guards. We ask them to know first aid. We ask them to deliver babies. We ask them to be marriage counselors, family counselors. We ask them to make determinations on custody visitations. They're required to interpret court orders. They're required, not required, but often called upon to determine property rights, tenant-landlord disputes, trespasses, easements. Thanks to our legislature, they now are supposed to be the safety inspectors on the road, right? Okay. And what we hear a lot of lately, we expect them to respond to mental health crises. They are the messengers that get to be yelled at all the time. We ask them to deliver death notices. They're supposed to be conversant in the drug schedules. They're supposed to be conversant and well-versed so they can make a constitutional decision in a second, in a split second. They're supposed to be on top of all the new legislation as well. They're supposed to be familiar with recent case law. They're supposed to be able to put up with being called all kinds of vulgar names and spit upon and accused of all kinds of heinous acts and not respond. They're expected to investigate a fatal car crash that might involve a child that might have been the same age as one of theirs. And then after they leave that, they're expected to go ahead and maybe make another traffic stop by some entitled East Bencher who's going to call them a jackbooted Nazi thug. And they're not supposed to respond inappropriately. I was going to show one other video, but Bob's rule is if it's questionable, then don't. You recall just a few days ago, there were a couple of LA deputy sheriffs that were basically ambushed in their car while they were watching a station there in Compton. And anyway, there was a group of individuals that gathered outside the hospital afterwards. And I was going to subject you to 2 minutes of what their vitriol was. But the language is pretty harsh. And again, I know that you've read enough reports, you've seen enough videos, you know what they put up with. And so I wasn't going to change this family-friendly presentation into something different than that. But those of you that didn't hear that, I mean, this video is actually taken by the people doing the protest. They talked about that, pointing to each of those officers, that they're going to die one by one, and that they hope that the officers that are being treated die as well. They're accused of being the worst gang in the United States and the most murderous as well. So knowing all of this, we as prosecutors can't cut them any slack. They're required to be held, just as we are, to the highest ethical standards. We signed up for this. So truly, let's be aspirational. Let's keep our officers, or invite our officers to be aspirational, remembering that we always all have room for improvement in all areas of our life. Of course, my wife lovingly reminds me that there is one area in my life that I have become perfect in. I am perfectly imperfect. And so being an officer has always been tough, and it's just getting tougher. Are we taking care of our officers? Do they realize, are they doing okay? Do they realize that there are resources out there for them? The fire service does such a better job than this thing. I mean, the fire service, they debrief everything. You think about our police officers, they go from one call to the next without much of an opportunity to debrief, discuss, vent, whatever. So let's make sure they're being taken care of. So what is our role in helping these officers do their best? Do we have a role? Am I being presumptuous? Well, I would submit that we do have a role. We should have a role. We can, if we want, have that role. We have, as I've got here, we have a unique vantage point when it comes to police officers. We have the chance to critically review all their reports, more than just how their sergeant or supervisors review their reports. We get to hear defense counsels review, their critical review of those reports. We get to visit with the officer and see how they respond to our probing, sometimes our difficult questions, our critiques, our feedback. We get to see that as well. We should pay attention when we hear them talk about their work, their supervisors, their agency, the judges, the defendants, the witnesses, the victims. And here's an opportunity for introspection right now. What do they hear us say about our work, our supervisors, our agency, the judges, defendants, victims, and witnesses? If we ever get back to court, we have the opportunity to hear them testify. But not just testify, we get to see their reaction when there's evidence and testimony that specifically contradicts what it was that they just said. How do they handle that? How do they handle acquittals? These are all opportunities to evaluate, to teach, to train, and for us to even learn. Let me give you an example of this. I had a suppression hearing, and the issue was Miranda, whether there was a Miranda violation. And after the hearing, we're talking out in the foyer, me and probably 3 or 4 officers, and we're talking about Miranda. You know, there's always these different philosophies. And one of the more senior officers spoke up and he says, I like Miranda. The rest of us kind of paused for a minute, says, well, explain this to me. He said, the reason I like Miranda, he said that we, regardless of what the case is, you can be investigating the most terrible thing in the world and really not happy with what this person has done. He says, but once I read them the Miranda warning, it tells me this person is a citizen. They have the same protections that I do. I like Miranda. It puts me back in the proper role and the proper perspective. I learned a lot that day. And maybe we can share those type of moments. We can encourage that view that they use these protections and understand that they're for us as well, not just the defendant, not just those that we run into. So how do you feel about Miranda? There's no wrong answer. Do we have the opportunity to provide the greater perspective? Do we have the opportunity to perpetuate goodness, wisdom, and that good perspective? Before we go much further, and I hope I haven't lost those county folks already, know what some of you are thinking that, well, you know, there's Garside, he's got it easy. He only has to worry about 80 or 90 sworn officers. I've got 10 agencies that have their own practices, policies, and corporate culture. And then there's the small offices out there that's saying, yeah, I'm a one-person show, man. I don't have time to do any of this. Well, as I prepared for this, I tried to talk to enough of different people in different situations that I hope that each one of us can at least draw something. We can find some way, again, that we can always improve. So I want to take another tangent here. I'm going to talk about risk management. So if I haven't lost you yet, I'm sure that everybody just tuned out. But there's an approach in risk management that at first might surprise you, but when you think about it, I hope that it doesn't. That in risk management, when they look at something that has gone wrong, when they talk to the people that were surrounding this or in the know, that those people are not surprised as who the person was that was involved in the incident. All right? They will say something like, well, if anybody was going to pile up a patrol car, we knew it was going to be him, right? Well, you know, she's always the one that pushes the edges in interrogations. There's a risk management guru out there that many of you might know. I know that your police agencies, your law enforcement agencies know this guy and they love this guy. All right, Gordon Graham. And his trademark line is this: if it's predictable, it's preventable. So what I want you to do, in other words, people were seeing this conduct, but it yet hadn't become a problem. Yet then it becomes a problem because nothing was done about it, even though they saw this problem. So I want you to take a minute right now, and I want you to think about a law enforcement officer. I want you to think about a peace officer that is maybe causing you some concern. Think about that. What is the concern? Why is it a concern? And what could it lead to? Now, what can you do to prevent the predictable? And if you have the opportunity to share that with your office, or even more importantly, share that with command staff in the law enforcement agency, remind them, if it's predictable, it's preventable. Now, there's the other side of that. You might be thinking about this officer, and you might be thinking, why can't this officer be more like that officer? Well, is there something that you can do about that? Let me give you another experience that I had. We had a law enforcement officer here who was assigned to the DUI patrol. And he's one of those that is driven, wants to do things right. He probably had the NHTSA manual memorized, I don't know, but he wanted to be good, he wanted to be effective, and he was. His reports were great. I wish he were still on DUI duty, but he does a great job where he is elsewhere. But seriously, he had got to the point where this was his reputation. Defense attorneys would say, this is a lynch case. Right, Marlies? It would say, I mean, this, I'm not talking about anywhere from Ogden to Salt Lake. We would hear this from different defense attorneys. This was an officer lynch case. What's the best you can give me? Seriously, they would do that. And so I took that information, and we're involved in our quarterly training, which is usually 4 different sessions with our law enforcement. And I took that to them and I said, you know what, your work product is your reputation. When the county attorney's office or the city attorney's office receives your report and they look at your name on there, do they have, we talked about implicit bias, what has been the pattern in the past, right? What type of reports has he done historically or she's done historically? What do you want your reputation to be? Of course, when that officer was involved in that section of training, I had him leave. I didn't want to embarrass him too much. But seriously, use those examples that they have, that they work with, that they can see that there are people out there that aspire to do well. So back to our unique vantage point, the opportunities that we have. Are you involved in training with your law enforcement? Formal training? Do you do formal training with them? Excellent. I mean, there should be opportunities to do legislative updates, the case law updates, right? Maybe go over city, county policies, their department policies, critical incident policies, you know, the pursuit policies, the laws of arrest and seizure. Go over those, and don't let those be a one-way street. Say, what do you see that our office, or me personally, what is it that we can do better? Strongly recommend getting involved and staying involved in training, because it really creates a natural exchange of information and gives you an opportunity to correct some things. We saw a contagion, I'll call it, since it's one of the current words, right? In some of our reports, people were talking about doing a Terry frisk without really doing a Terry frisk. Approached the subject, did a Terry frisk, and then asked him for their identification. Well, we got that corrected at our next quarterly training. We talked about that. In your training, don't hesitate to teach them to be critical thinkers and holding each other accountable. You know, we wear uniforms, and we think about uniforms as, okay, so we know who we are. Hate to always do sports analogies, but you think about sports analogies and the uniforms that they wear. Sometimes a fight will break out in a sporting event. Those of you that are hockey fans are not surprised at that, all right? And they're always handled differently, right? In hockey, they wait for them to fall on the ground and the ref jumps on top of them. Sometimes it's just the bench is clear and everybody goes after. But sometimes you'll see somebody, the cooler heads will prevail and they'll hold somebody back. Sometimes they're holding back a coach. Sometimes they're holding back another player, right? Cooler heads need to be prevailed. They need to be held accountable, okay? So as we do those legislative things, do those training things, make sure that we are holding them accountable. So I wanted to share this video with you. Maybe I do.
Here they come, and they just jump on him. His back was turned to him.
Well, Gamby starts fighting back right then and there, and it's bye-bye, those two men.
Here it is from a different angle. Basically, they're playing in Chicago, and this is actually a father and son team. They jump out of the stands and go attack Gamboa as he's being the first base coach.
As you can see.
Okay. Now, I want to play it again so you can watch it again. But I want you to watch the different roles. The first person coming out is the first person coming out of the dugout, trying to stop this or trying to exact a little revenge. The funniest thing, I think, is watching the first base ump and the first baseman on the other team. Not my team, man. Anything to do with this. Anyway, so they're up there punch on Gamboa. I mean, we're security, right? But I mean, so here comes it when they change the angle. You get to see the first guy come out. First, you can't see much here.
Back right then and there, and
but this next angle, you can come out, and he gets pretty good 2-for-1er in there. But yeah, there's the first base ump, and of course you can't even see the first baseman. So here, the ump's kind of thinking, well, should I get involved? First baseman's, I'm out of here, I'm walking away. And then here comes the first one, bonk. Anyway. So again,
as you can see,
we're on the same team, but we need to be critical thinkers, holding each other accountable, and doing what it is that we're supposed to. I had a great experience in my career that really garner this as somewhat of a touchstone. We had an officer arrest an off-duty officer from another jurisdiction for DUI here. And probably the thing that hit me the hardest in worrying about this was the fact that when the officer got pulled over, the first thing that the DUI arrestee did was flash his badge to our officer. And I just thought, man, that's just not right. I cannot honestly think in my entire career of receiving more pressure to come up with a resolution than I did on that case. I actually got a call from the head of that law enforcement agency telling me that I shouldn't be doing this. I had a friend, still have a friend, he's since retired from that agency, that he actually called me and invited me over to his house and talked to him about this. He said, you know what? We give confidential informants breaks all the time. I mean, if we don't look out for our own, who's going to look out for us? I mean, you know, we hear about professional courtesy on speeding tickets, which is another topic for another day, which is a terrible name. It's not professional courtesy anyway. And it was pretty interesting. In fact, the law enforcement community got to be kind of a topic of discussion to the point where even our officers and the arresting officers were saying, can't we do something about this? And my response was, you know what? We came together, we created a standard by which we were going to go by. And why should this be any different? Anyway, we ended up going to a jury trial on that. They did convict. My friend, when I was talking to him, he said, you know, it's not, don't think this is a threat. They're not looking for you, but please don't do anything to get pulled over in our jurisdiction. Okay. Anyway, when I was talking to the head of the agency, I said, you've got a great opportunity. If this person is not a good officer, good opportunity to go ahead and get rid of him. If it's a great officer, I'm confident that you can find 90 days of desk work or whatever until they, you know, eligible to get their license back. Anyway, conviction was had. Life went on. I tried to forget about it. I actually ran into that officer. I was going into court as that officer was coming out after having signing a warrant. And I went in. I wasn't in very long. I came out, and he was waiting for me in the foyer. And he said, "Thank you." And so I'll never forget that. And that was important to me. And I think that it taught me a great lesson, not in the short term, not in the moment, but what you're doing makes a difference in the long run. So take the opportunity to do one-on-one informal training as well. We have this opportunity every time we screen a case, every time we review an affidavit for a warrant, an 1102 statement, whatever. We have these opportunities. Let's look at them as opportunities. There's always room for improvement. I'm going to talk a little bit about a feedback formula that we use at the basic prosecutor course. We use at trial ad. We use in the train the trainer course, and it's a simple formula. And I want you to pay attention because I'm going to have you employ it as soon as we go through it. It gives you a framework within which to work. As you think about the framework, then it removes the emotion, and it doesn't just happen at work. This can apply anywhere. So the formula is simple. There's just 4 simple steps. Okay. The first thing is the head note, the headline. That you're on common ground. That you make the statement that I want to talk to you about something. And when you list what the topic is, if they don't know what the topic is, then they can explain that to you. You go, okay, then we need to start somewhere else. So you tell them what the headline is, what the head note is. I want to talk to you about, and then you give them the playback. You tell them or explain to them or show them or relate to them what it was that you saw that happened that might not be as good as perhaps they thought or you think. And again, they may teach you something that you didn't know. And then you'll explain the rationale, which means you'll reach an agreement on as to why that maybe wasn't the best way to do this. Or maybe that there is a better way. It was a good way to do it, but maybe there's a better way to do it. And then the final one is the remedy or a goal. If you agree, you come to an agreement on the rationale, okay, what do we do going forward? How can we change this? How can we change this going forward? All right. So let me give you an example. Let's talk about the Terry Frisk situation. And you just simply say to the officer, you know what? I want to talk to you about using the term Terry Frisk in your report. I read it and it says, I approached the suspect and conducted a Terry Frisk. But the report does not indicate your justification, your reasonable suspicion to support your Terry Frisk. As you will recall, you can only do a Terry Frisk if you have reasonable suspicion that the person is armed and dangerous, both of those. Failing to do so could subject us to a suppression motion. That we'd have to argue that, or if you just did it, then it's simply a constitutional violation, right? You just violated their constitutional rights. So I would recommend that if indeed you don't have any reasonable suspicion that you can articulate about that, but there's that officer safety, that hunch, that type of concern, that you take some other precautions to make sure that you stay safe, all right? And why don't you take this opportunity to teach me what those would be? I'd like to hear what those are. And then have that officer teach you, well, these are some measures that I've been trained to take if indeed I'm not feeling like I'm really in a safe situation. When I do training for Layton City, I always say, okay, number one objective is I want people going home at the end of the shift, healthy and happy. And our second objective is right behind it. I want you going home at the end of your shift, happy and healthy and still employed, okay? So that they follow the policies, that they do these right. Like I said, this could lead to a great training opportunity. You go through those steps and you talk about that and you say, wow, the officer might say, you know what? Yeah, you're right. I really didn't have any reason to frisk you. I can't believe I just violated that guy's constitutional rights. I say, okay, well, explain to me what was going on. Talk to me, walk me through the stop, the approach, the conversation. And it's likely, more times than not, I would guess 9 times out of 10, is when that officer explains that situation to you, they're going to articulate reasonable suspicion that the person was armed and dangerous. Does that make sense? So take that and then just tell them that. Guess what? You just did exactly what we're talking about. You actually did have articulable reasonable suspicion. That was an excellent stop. That was the right way. Now we just need to make sure that's included in the report. All right, so let's practice this really quick. All right. So while maintaining safe social distance, getting close enough that you can hear someone in their muffled tone, or if you're alone, you can do what we do without admitting, is that you can talk to yourself about this. I want you to go through these steps. Come up with a scenario in your mind. Maybe it's someone in your office that has a distracting action that they do while they're in court. Okay, think about that. And if you can't think of one, then, you know, maybe they're a pen clicker in court. Use that. I mean, you know, again, what is the head note that you're going to say? I want to talk to you about. What do you mean I click my pen in court? I don't do that. Anyway, so just take a few minutes and think of something along those lines, and I want you to go through those 4 steps.
Go ahead.
My wife Obviously, they're on the calendar. They're working down. Okay. But at the same time, standing up is very objection. So it's not like a raise awareness to juxtapose the jury as to your objection. So is it offensive? Offensive, it didn't catches the eye of distraction. Objection that you. Okay, well, that's actually the
People look at my shoes. All right, good. Now let's switch roles. Let's change roles, and then you be the critiquer, and let's come up with something different. Let's say that you're talking to an officer about using cop talk during when they testify or whatever, something along those lines. So yeah, change roles and go through another critiquing scenario. If you can't come up with one, use that one.
So the way we fix that is if he's using it, I have to say because I usually that's the assumption that's on the same person. Just builds up with so we're not so many different acronyms. Problem is, I don't want to say first everyone has a cover and how whatever they want to know way to go to like anytime they don't know the actual acronym. Right.
All right. Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. It's like I say, it's simple and it's amazing how that applies. I mean, I even use it on my kids. So
You didn't say you used it on your wife.
Well, because she's perfect. Maybe I need to have her use this on me a little bit better so I can continue to perfect my imperfection. Thanks. One of the ways that doing this type of feedback, one of the things that's important, I should say, is what is your relationship with that person. All right, that to me that's important. It depends on what that relationship is. So then another cause for introspection. You need to know yourself. What kind of relationships are you good in? All right. If in the parenting scenario, are you the rule follower or are you the Disneyland parent? Right. If you coach your child, is your child always in the limelight? Going to be the quarterback regardless? If they don't even know how to put their cleats on the right feet? Or do you hold your child to a higher standard? You need to know that. And in this situation, you know, let me give you an example. I had in a prior life, I had a city manager, and we were having a direct discussion, and he was not following the guidelines here, those 4 steps. And he said to me, he said, I'm worried about your relationship with the police officers. You're getting too close to the police officers. In doing so, you're going to lose your objectivity. Because now these are your friends, your buddies, your pals. You're not going to have that tendency to be critical as you need to be independent, to be objective. And I respectfully disagreed. and this is me, everybody's different, I would rather hear something from my wife, because I know what her motivation is. Well, sometimes her motivation is not for her to be embarrassed, but I know what their motivation is. They really have my best interests at heart, as opposed to somebody who is aloof, who I have no relationship with. So think about that. If you need to know who you are, what type of relationship you're effective in, and then know those boundaries. What can I do? What kind of relationship can I develop and still maintain my objectivity, my independence? And so that is key. Another story that comes to mind comes from Dave Ramsey, and he talks about, he's a financial guru, and he's talking about a family-owned business. And he talks about the problem that the owner of the business, the father, was having with one of the employees, his son. And so they had tried so many different ways to do this, and it just wasn't working out. I mean, it wasn't. And so the boss takes the employee to lunch, and they're there. He's actually wearing a hat that says boss on it. And they talk about his performance, or the lack thereof, and says, you know what? We don't have any choice. At this point, we're going to have to let you go. And so at that moment, the boss takes off his hat, puts on another hat that says dad, and he says, son, I understand you just lost your job. What do we need to do to help you? Okay? So can you do that? Can you change hats and say, okay, yeah, we play softball together, we play basketball together, we go fishing together, we go hunting together. I've got on my attorney hat right now, and this is how we need to talk. I've got on my coworker hat today, as opposed to my buddy hat. All right. So know yourself. All right. And again, how do we build that relationship? By being ourselves, by being genuine. All right. We make the opportunities to have those exchanges, the formal and the informal trainings that we do. Okay. Another relationship that we need to work on is amongst ourselves as attorneys, particularly those that share jurisdictions, like the counties and the cities, right? If the county attorney's office has a problem with one of a city officer, do you have that type of relationship where they would share that, say, hey, you know what, I'm concerned about this officer? Let me give you an example. This is a long time ago, so I know that it's been administrations ago, so it's not anybody that's around here now. We investigated an accident involving some Davis County deputies. And as we looked into it, there were some concerns. So I called the county attorney's office and said, hey, are you guys aware of this? And he says, oh, let me give you the attorney that knows about that. So I talked to that attorney and said, are you guys aware of this? And they said, yes, we're aware of that. And we've already started our own internal investigation. Disciplinary process has already started that. Great. Okay. And they've done the same thing for us. It's been a while, and we've got a bunch of new officers, so I need to make sure that conduit is still there. But that shouldn't be exclusive. If they see something that's awry, they should feel free to go directly to the police department. And so anyway, that I think is an important one as well. Again, on the team, thinking critical, holding people accountable, making our team better. All right. So let's talk about, again, with the agency, with our counterparts, responding to concerns. What are you going to do now when you see a concern? When you're reading a report, when you're watching a video? All right, so get your mind thinking along those lines right now. And as I come up with a couple of different scenarios, think about what it is that you would do when you see this. Okay? Let's say that you're watching a video and you see a pat down, and it's not in the report. Let's say that you're watching a dash cam, and they're doing a search of a vehicle that was a consent search, and all of a sudden the driver of the car revokes their consent, and the search continues. What would you do? Let's say that officers are not talking with anybody, just amongst themselves, but the language, maybe an example of what we heard this morning, was rude and crude and otherwise irreverent. And maybe they were just venting. What would you do? Tyson, what would you do?
Probably depend on the relationship I have with that officer versus the superior.
Okay, he says depends on his relationship with the officer or his superior, right?
I'd go to one of them.
Okay.
Certainly, but depending on the relationship, it probably.
You do something, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wouldn't it be, how's this for a learning experience? You bring the officer in, you play the video. I mean, you know, how they're going to react to that. You just remind them that in this day and age, with all the videos and all the microphones around, it's there for the entire world to see. Just as a reminder of that. Okay. What if during that same exchange, all of a sudden they start to use language that shows that they've kind of lost their objectiveness in this investigation? What would you do? What if it's a simple training mistake? Maybe they mistake the law or they make a legal mistake. Now what are you going to do? And of course, in this day and age, use of force concerns. Now, again, some of us are involved in this on an ongoing basis. Some of us are not. And sometimes when we see those situations, it gives us an opportunity to learn. It gives us an opportunity to be educated as to what it is that's going on. I know that in the recent ones, you've seen all kinds of videos going all over about different uses of force, what it is that's going on. And sometimes in social media, we see this much. And then later the department releases this much with an explanation as to what was going on. So again, we see these things. Sometimes we're quick to judge, but we should do it with an open mind because we aren't there. We weren't there. We don't know what's going on. And then probably the more difficult one, I mean, other than maybe obviously use of force is an issue, but if you did see a criminal violation, what would you do? My philosophy is that I always want to solve a problem at the lowest level, depending on the problem, obviously. If it's simply a training issue, that's great. I'm going to talk to the officer. If it's an issue where I see someone who's maybe beginning to do shortcuts, maybe there's maybe lack of judgment. The ends justify the mean type of an approach, then obviously a supervisor needs to be involved. All right. And so you need to decide when you see these, how you're going to respond. On the other hand, don't hesitate. I mean, they talk about this in parenting all the time. We only react when we see them doing wrong. When they're playing well with each other, when you see someone do something exemplary, why not let them know? Why not let the supervisor know? I saw a video some time ago. Obviously, this is a little bit different. I mean, this is kind of an extreme example where an officer pulls over a guy and there's a child not in a child seat. And it's obvious that from the make and model of the car and the way that the people in the car are dressed, that they're not all that financially well off. And the officer says, drive over to, and names a store. The officer goes over there and buys them a car seat. Okay, obviously that's an extreme example, but when you see someone who has, probably everybody's seen that old video of the trooper who pulls over a guy in a Jeep and the guy just goes ballistic and he goes off on him forever and ends up shredding the ticket and throwing it out. And the officer says, well, you just maintains a calm voice. That's a littering charge. You want to come out and pick it? And the guy is just he's going 100 miles an hour, going ballistic, being an absolute jerk for minutes, and the officer never loses his composure. Well, why not? Why not share that? Okay. Creighton Horton wrote the book, The Reluctant Prosecutor, and I've had a chance to read most of that, and it has some great insight. He shares some of the same examples that I have as far as coming across and being pressured into filing charges when I wasn't ready, and his experience was the same of mine. The relationship is actually stronger afterwards. I did a case. It was a conflict case. It was another jurisdiction. So this is an officer that I hadn't worked with before at all. And it was a difficult case, and it was a little bit politically charged. And we were having a pretty good conversation. And he said to me, I've invested a lot of time and energy in this. I really think charges need to be filed. And my response to him was, okay. I mean, he was an experienced officer, and you could tell there was some frustration there because this was not a pleasant case. And I just said, is that the standard? And we had a great conversation about that. And I said, to be honest with you, if I were a suspect in a case, I'd want you to do the investigation because of the way that you've approached this one. I would feel like you did a great investigation. Now, I would hope that you would feel the same way about the way that we're looking at this case as we screen it. So one other thing, I will end on time, I promise. Just a quick thing, another topic that someone says, well, when you talk about this, we also want you to talk about, is there liability if we do nothing? Okay. And so just quickly, from a state standpoint, there has to be some type of a tort under our current makeup of the law, which means that we would owe somebody a duty. And the way the law reads, that's not a duty to the general public. Okay, so there wouldn't be personal liability, but that's not our touchstone. That's not our guidepost. Remember, the law is the minimum standard. The minimum standard is far from aspirational, right? Okay, federal law, a little bit different. Section 1983, everybody loves 42, 1983. The officer is only going to be personally liable if his conduct violated a clearly established constitutional situation, right? Which a lot of times, if they did, they did. But how they come after what we do, our inaction, would be, they like to talk a lot about negligent retention, negligent hiring. Okay, you never should have hired this person because they're terrible, or your training is terrible. Negligent retention, I shouldn't say hiring. I mean, that's sometimes used, but it's more retention and the training issue. And so what they do there, they look at the decision makers. What are the decision makers doing to correct this type of conduct? Are they letting it go? Do they not care about training, whatever, 40 hours, we don't care, or they let this conduct go? That's when our inaction may be evidence. Again, we wouldn't be held personally liable, but so just think about that, and just make sure that there is no inaction on your part, okay? So, as a reminder, who is our client? That we are ministers, we are servants of justice. That is who our client is. And what does that mean to you? As prosecutors, I hope that you're proud of that. That you feel and understand the weight of that obligation and that duty. Sometimes in the frenetic pace of our practice, those ideals, those ideas get pushed in the back of our head. That doesn't mean we don't forget about them. They still are the foundation, the base for the decisions that we make, which is good, but we need to keep that in the forefront. We talked about the two different thoughts today. Sometimes it becomes too automatic. Let's bring it back in where we're deliberately and consciously thinking about these things, and that we're committed never to sully that duty, that obligation to our community, not just our employing community, not just to the legal community, but the criminal justice community, which is our entire community, because we know that when we do something wrong, it goes on forever. If we do something right, it can go on forever. Again, like President Wyatt said, we're the teachers. We're the teachers of society. And the same thing is with our officers. Let's let them be the example as well. So what is our role? We want to be aspirational. We want our reality to be aspirational. We want to feel that weight and responsibility. We want to exemplify that. And we want to share that commitment. Who is our client? Who do the officers protect? Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Steve. It's been a great day. We will see everybody back here tomorrow morning at 8:30 bright and early. Have a good evening, guys.